Hello everyone and welcome to the third part of Chapter 7 on Samadhi and Jhana in the context of the lecture series True Dhamma Following in the Footsteps of the Buddha. My name is Dr. Florian Lau from the Dhamma Hub, and today we will continue where we left off last time. In the last lecture we have mainly discussed the 5 hindrance model, and it took quite some time as it is heavily misunderstood. A big part of this lecture is actually undoing many of the wrong views that are circulating in contemporary Buddhism and meditation pretty much. So I have to address all those biases and all those views that are out there that are not necessarily in line with the suttas. So should you choose to actually practice what is in the suttas, then it might be necessary to relinquish some of your views. This time around we will do the entire rest of the lecture, namely everything on the 4 jhanas, on practical jhana meditation or meditation on non-activity, let's put it like that, and then we will discuss the immaterial jhanas and have one slide on the supernatural powers that have been discussed in Buddhism. And then in the end we will have a short summary, and as pretty much always I have forgotten to set up my timer, and I will repeat that now, so that I know how long I've been talking, so that I don't overdo it. But anyway, let us now do 5 minutes of non-reactivity as always, and then dive into the content. And again, you can pause the video, so this is purely optional, but if you want to have the optimal experience and understand free from craving and not through your cravings, and having a bit weakened craving before you watch the lecture is likely a good idea. So whatever happens in your meditation, just do not act out of greed, wanting something more, aversion, wanting something to go away, or distraction, wanting to experience something else. Try to do that for 5 minutes. I will pause now for a moment and then continue. Okay, I assume that you are done now, so that we can continue with the lecture. And of course, I want to start with the first jhana. And again, you have to keep all that I have said in the last lecture on Samadhi in mind. Namely, what Samadhi even is, and that Samadhi culminates in jhana. And when the Buddha explained the first jhana, he said that noise and company are a thorn in the first jhana. So when you actually want to practice the first jhana as it is meant by the Buddha, then you should make sure that there are the right external conditions. The Buddha was very keen on pointing out that it is best when a monk spends a lot of time in seclusion when he meditates. So when the first jhana is your goal, it is most likely to happen when you are in seclusion. In an empty room, close the door, no one there, in an empty hut, in a forest where there is no one around. This is a necessary precondition, especially in the beginning. And then speech ceases in the first jhana. Speech ceases to be yours. You cannot really speak anymore. But yeah, this is also very important. And now to a very important point that is extremely overlooked nowadays. Namely, that thinking and pondering are very much there in the first jhana. The Buddha even used thinking and pondering as the defining characteristic of the first jhana. This is the thing he pretty much named first when he talked about the first jhana. It is not that thinking and pondering are wispy in the background or anything like that. They are very much there. They define that state. That thinking is not necessarily yours, as an example. It is happening, and you know that it is happening, but again, it is a defining characteristic. It is very much what makes that state that state. So whenever someone says that the first jhana is completely without those things, or applied and sustained thought or something like that, all those things came much, much later and have never been discussed in the suttas. So when you want to practice according to the suttas, then the first jhana is very much defined by the presence of thinking and pondering. But yeah, appropriating and selfing and the assumption of external fade away when you enter the first jhana. And this includes, at least temporarily, the conceit I am. And this is something that usually takes some time to sink in for many people, because the conceit I am is something that is very subtle. So having that fade requires a lot of prior work of weakening or uprooting sensuality. So not everyone can just enter such a state, so which is also very important. So the state is entirely wholesome, as even the wrong knowledge that is usually there, the misconceiving that is usually there, fades away. And you could call this state the imperturbable, because nothing can shake your perception of non-self, your perception of Dhamma. And it's completely non-active. because your sense of mastery and control fades away. That is a wrong assumption. That is the self-assumption, pretty much. An assumption of control, external mastery, all those things, of ownership. And when that fades, what remains is entirely wholesome. And dwelling in such a state feels very good. It is a big relief because there is nothing you must protect. There is nothing like that left anymore. And you stop activity, and this is very important. You cannot do your way out of activity. You cannot actively remove activity because that would also be an activity. You can only stop it by noticing that it was impossible in the first place. And this requires some insight, some wisdom. But yeah, there are some still present very, very subtle things like in and out breathing that assume implicitly some external. You breathe the air from outside inside. So that is still there as an example. Okay, and the Buddha, and this is very important, and I kind of like to emphasize that a lot, the Buddha called any jhana a temporary liberation of mind. And a liberated state is not what most people think of it. Liberation means relief, freedom from, surpassing, transcending, all those things. It does not mean divine pleasure. It just does not. Again, pleasure is not the metric that we should use for progress when it comes to insight. And in the end, Buddhism is all about insight, which is also very important. But now to a short simile when it comes to jhanas. Again, I've split those up into two pieces so that I can say everything that is important. But again, you can read it up. Those are pretty much all from the same sutta, where the Buddha discusses all the jhanas in a lot of detail. And this is a simile that the Buddha used to explain the look and feel of jhanas to people who might not have understood it otherwise. And again, the Buddha starts with, here, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. Important, you are transcending the domain of the body. You are secluded from sensual pleasures. You no longer want them. And this includes the wanting for good feelings to happen. You are secluded from that. You are secluded from unwholesome states, which includes, again, all the wrong assumptions, all the wrong views, all the wrong knowledge. That has to fade. As it is stated here. A monk enters and abides in the first jhana. It is a culmination of samadhi, which is accompanied by thought and examination, or thinking and pondering, however you want to translate it. That is a defining characteristic. It is there. And it has mental ease and bodily pleasure, and now this is incredibly important, born of seclusion. Those pleasures, that feeling of ease, is there due to the seclusion. It is not there due to the jhana. So you can have mental ease and bodily pleasure without having a jhana, easily, as the Buddha said here. Those are of the seclusion, not of the jhana. And then he makes the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion, again, drench, steep, fill, and pervades his body, so that there is no part of his body unpervaded by the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion. It's even highlighted again, it is of the seclusion. And then he continues with a short simile. Just as a skilled bathman or bathman's apprentice heaps bath powder in a metal basin and sprinkles it gradually with water, kneads it till the moisture wets his ball of bath powder, soaks it and pervades it inside out. Yet the ball itself does not ooze. So too, a monk that makes the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervades his body, so that there is no part of his whole body unpervaded by the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of seclusion. This is from Majjhima Nikaya number 77, and you can get a look and feel of what jhana is like based on this simile. Again, there is a lot of pleasure in the jhana, there is a lot of relief in the jhana, but it is also important that that pleasure is conditioned by the seclusion and not by the jhana. So if you do it rightly, the pleasure is there. But overall, what makes the jhanas nice is a seclusion from the sensual domain. This is very important. But yeah, here is a bit more information on what the first jhana feels like. First of all, the body is filled with pleasure. It can be vibrating and tingly, but again, this is due to the seclusion. Piti and sukha and emotions are not feeling or vedana. As the Buddha explained it, feeling or vedana can just be good, bad, or neutral. And you are secluded from that, because feelings kinda belong to the body and not to you. And the entire state is nice because of the freedom from the pressure that feelings exert on you. And this is very important. Feelings oppress you, as we have discussed a lot in the past. And joy and all the other things are a result and not a cause. They are a byproduct. The pleasure that you feel, the relief that you feel, is a result. It is not of the jhana, it is caused by it. It is the other way around. It is there before. The joy and all those things are there before, and then the jhana happens. And you can be technically in jhana, which is very important, while bad feelings, bad vedana, are there. You are beyond that. You have gone beyond your feelings. And the mind in jhana cultivates the perception of danger and sensuality, because you notice that you cannot own anything in the central domain. The central domain is happening on its own, it's changing on its own, and there is nothing that you can do. The senses are, in a sense, under constant attack. At all times, something bad could happen there. And as long as you own them, you will suffer through that. And if you do not own them, then it will just pass through you, in a sense. And even good feelings are seen as bad when you are in jhana, as an example, because you see how even good feelings force you to act on them. They force you to want more of that. They induce craving, so to speak. And methods overall give wrong incentive when it comes to jhana, because those methods usually make you want to attain something, want to get something. And this can often block real jhana and leave you stuck with just the pleasures of virtue, as an example. Because whenever you perform a method to gain that nice pleasure, to gain that ease, to gain that state, then that cannot be done without craving. So in essence, jhana can only happen to you. It is nothing that you do, which is very important. You can only create the causes and conditions that are right for jhana to appear, and then jhana will manifest. But as long as you think that jhana is something that you can do through some kind of method, then the state will be blocked for you. Some states that are bordering the jhanas are still possible, but not that what the Buddha called real jhana. And now we come to the second jhana, and the Buddha said that thought and pondering, or thinking and pondering, are a thorn in the second jhana. And this requires a really good establishment in the first jhana. And wanting the second jhana before the first jhana is developed leads to neither. And the Buddha compared that to a cow that tries to take 2 steps at once in the mountains and then just falls. That's from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Ninth, number 35. And the pleasure, let's call it pleasure, in the second jhana is more subtle. The pleasure goes away and is replaced more and more by peace, by a feeling of peacefulness and freedom from pressure. And those states can only really be appreciated by a mind that is withdrawn from all the wanting, from all the craving and all those things. Because a neutral feeling is the best feeling in the world for a person who understands it, for a person who has developed insight and wisdom. But for a person who has not developed such things, the neutral feeling is actually quite oppressive and feels quite bad. So when there is nothing going on, examples of boredom, for example, then that feels bad for a mind that is not trained in the Buddha's dispensation, which is very important. So the pleasures in the jhanas do not get more ecstatic or anything like that. The mind starts cooling down from sensuality. And in fact, there is less and less things going on, less and less things that touch you. It gets more and more subtle. And the very subtle underlying tendencies do remain still. There are some things that move away, like your thinking, as an example. Thinking and pondering are surmounted in the second jhana. And the Buddha explained it as follows. With the stilling of thought and examination, or thinking and pondering, again, however you want to translate it, a monk enters upon and abides in the second jhana, which has self-confidence and singleness of mind without thought and examination, but still with mental ease and bodily pleasure born of concentration. And he makes the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of concentration drench, steep, fill, and pervade his body, so that there is no part of the body unpervaded by the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of concentration. Just as though there were a lake whose water welled up from below, and it had no inflows from the east, the west, the north, or the south, and would not be replenished from time to time by showers of rain, then the cool fount of water welling up in the lake would make the cool water drench, steep, fill, and pervade the lake, so that there is no part of the whole lake unpervaded by cool water. So too, a monk makes the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of concentration drench, steep, fill, pervade this body, so that there is no part of the whole body unpervaded by the mental ease and bodily pleasure born of concentration. And the characteristics of the second jhana are that thought and pondering vanish in the second jhana. It is also called noble silence by the Buddha for that very reason, because the mental chit-chat dies down, and the speech, the real speech, that has already been removed in the first jhana. And it is a much calmer mental joy, and the calmness, the peace, the ease moves into the foreground, and it's much more prominent in the bodily pleasure. And it's very important to keep in mind the distinction between sukha and dukkha. Dukkha is the suffering that we are pretty much always facing in life due to the presence of craving, but it is replaced by a state of ease, which is due to the absence of dukkha. And mindfulness, and this is very important, is a defining characteristic of any of the jhanas, as we can clearly see in Majjhima Nikaya number 111, and it grows ever stronger. And again, mindfulness is the knowledge of I am doing X. Whatever is happening, you know what is happening. And the mind does not get more absorbed or anything like that. Absolutely not. If anything, you have more and more about the background of experience at present that you can know and examine. And the welling up of the water can feel like showers of relief. So it can hit in waves, as an example. And it is a peaceful and sublime state, which is very much desirable by those people who have developed their minds in that regard, which again is very important to keep in mind. Enjoying the jhanas requires mental development, because there is less and less going on. There is less pleasure. And you must have a trained mind to enjoy that neutral kind of feeling. It is the best feeling. It is the most sublime of all feelings. But it needs development beforehand. It has to be cultivated. Otherwise, you won't enjoy it. And the third jhana, and I have to admit that there are less and less things that can be said about those states, is mental ease, where mental ease ceases. Mental ease should be regarded as a thorn in the third jhana, as the Buddha said. And it is more subtle than the second still. And feelings are byproducts, as byproducts slowly cease. And mindfulness grows even stronger. And more about our implicit assumptions about self and external and all those things fade away. And equanimity also surfaces. So there is really less and less going on. And equanimity becomes more and more prominent. And the Buddha explained it as follows, in a simile. Again, with the fading away of mental ease, a monk abides in equanimity, and his mindfulness, and is mindful and fully aware. Still feeling pleasure with the body, he enters upon and abides in the third jhana, on account of which noble ones announce, he has a pleasant abiding who has equanimity and is mindful. He makes the pleasure divested of mental ease, drench, steep, fill, and pervades his body, so that there is no part of this whole body unpervaded by the pleasure divested of mental ease. Just as in a pond of blue, red, and white lotuses, some lotuses that are born and grow in the water thrive immersed in the water without rising out of it. And cool water drenches, steeps, fills, and pervades them to their tips and their roots, so that there is no part of all those lotuses unpervaded by cool water. So too, a monk makes the pleasure divested of mental ease, drench, steep, fill, and pervade his body, so that there is no part of his body, a whole body, unpervaded by the pleasure divested of mental ease. And as you can see, more and more of even the pleasure and the mental ease, the joy, or however you want to translate it, fade away. They are not there anymore. So they become not more ecstatic or anything like that. If anything, they become more and more neutral, which is a very, very important thing to keep in mind. When people talk about all the jhanas, they pretty much always compare them with more and more ecstatic and expanding experiences that are more glorious and whatever. This is not what the Buddha taught. His jhanas are states of peace that ultimately culminate in equanimity. And in the third jhana, the equanimity really becomes a prominent factor that is due to the vision of non-self. So this is pretty much the only way you can experience real equanimity. You can only really remove yourself from your experience if you know that it is impossible in the first place. And non-discontentment with the arisen experience is more or less the result. And the mind stops trying to get rid of most disagreeable things that you could imagine. And from the point of view of the third jhana, as an example, the second jhana is quite gross, even though from the normal experience, the second jhana is extremely sublime. And most of the pulling and pushing in the mind ceases completely, and is a state of great clarity of knowledge. And one could say that it has a rather cool feeling to it, a rather hollow feeling, like you are completely separated from the world of the senses by a thick layer of water. And again, it can only really be enjoyed by a trained mind. And it's already very close to full liberation of mind. This is also very important. People always think that they can practice the jhanas before stream entry, way before stream entry. But when the Buddha taught them, he pretty much always taught them to people who were already sotapannas or higher. And when people have developed the third or the fourth jhana, those people were very close to the final liberation of mind. So this is also something that you should keep in mind when you try to practice the jhanas according to what the Buddha described. That does not mean that you cannot have joy in meditation or pleasure in meditation before that. You can very much have that. The states of samadhi that are not necessarily peak jhana, as an example, are still very nice. So that is also very important to keep in mind. But anyway, let us now come to the fourth jhana. And again, there is less and less to describe about each jhana. Experience becomes even less assumed and your body stops being there. It stops being completely appropriated. And even in and out breathing is a thorn in the fourth jhana, and it fades away. And the breath no longer is no longer based on the assumption of external. And the state is also called mindfulness, purified by equanimity. And those people who have developed the fourth jhana are incredibly close to arahantship pretty much. At least when we go by the interpretation of jhana according to the suttas. So when you have developed your mind to that degree, then there is not much separating you from final knowledge. Let's put it like that. And the Buddha described the fourth jhana as follows. Again, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of mental ease and unease, the monk enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana. And I might have to say, even though it was not explicitly mentioned, the first jhana already abandons grief for the world. So there is no mental suffering. It is impossible. That is not there anymore. And the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. He sits pervading his body with a pure, bright mind, so that there is no part of his whole body unpervaded by the pure, bright mind. Just as though a man were sitting covered from head down with a white cloth, so that there would be no part of his whole body not covered by the white cloth, so too a monk sits pervading this body with a pure, bright mind, so that there is no part of his whole body unpervaded by a pure, bright mind. And thereby, and this is very important, many disciples of mine, abiding, having reached the consummation and perfection of direct knowledge. So what you see here is that people oftentimes have attained final knowledge, namely Nibbana, by dwelling in that state long enough. And the suttas are very clear on that. It is also, I should also point out that people can also attain final Nibbana just by dwelling in the first, second, or third jhana. The first jhana can be called the basis for liberation of mind, as the Buddha often phrased it. And again, what you see here is pretty much that you go even beyond pleasure and pain. So this state has not even pleasure of the mundane kind. So there is no pleasure, there is no joy. All that remains is pretty much a neutral feeling. And that neutral feeling is from the perspective of a person who has insight. Very pleasant. It is a big relief, as that peaceful feeling is the most sublime of all. But again, you can only appreciate that really based on insight. Then it is the most sublime thing. Then it is the best of refuges, the best of all things that you can imagine, the highest happiness pretty much. Or very close to the highest happiness of Nibbana. But again, it requires prior training. It requires cultivation, otherwise you cannot appreciate it. And that is very important to keep in mind. But yeah, now to the slide on what the fourth jhana feels like. And deep-rooted bodily feelings of pleasure and pain, we very much own pleasure and pain, cease. And there's no more painfulness, there's the assumption of the self-assumption, and it fades. And then, pain is not really painful anymore. And it's very peaceful and sublime, and you are filled by a pure white light, pretty much, covered from head to toe. And many monks have attained Nibbana there. And there, and this is very important, there can be freedom from pain without you being in the fourth jhana. It is not a necessary condition, as I like to call it, from the scientific point of view. It's not just one thing that must be there and that constitutes the entire jhana. It is a culmination of many factors of awakening. This is always something that you should keep in mind. Jhana overall is the culmination of various past factors. And all jhanas can be understood as specific types of mindfulness directed at the body. And you can look that up in Majjhima Nikaya number 117, where the Buddha talks about jhanas in the context of developing mindfulness of the body. And he says that too is a way of cultivating mindfulness of the body rightly. And you pretty much understand the entire sensual domain, which is a domain of the body, or the domain of the senses, which have the body as their basis, and you are thereby free from it by understanding it, understanding that it is beyond your reach, that that domain belongs to the body and is forever beyond you. And the Buddha called people with developed jhanas, with all developed jhanas, body witnesses, for a reason. And you can see Majjhima Nikaya number 70 for more on that. But yeah, now we have a short overview of all the jhanas and how the factors develop as a rough approximation. So as you can see here, this is pretty much a picture that has various different things. So before the first jhana to the extreme, I can't point to it, the green screen is a bit too short for that, but the yellow part, as you can see, is there before the first jhana. So there are hindrances present before you enter the first jhana. But to enter the first jhana, the hindrances must cease. But there are also thought and the feelings of ease, mindfulness, and maybe even some equanimity already. But again, that equanimity the Buddha was talking about only starts manifesting much later. And then with the fading of the 5 hindrances, you pretty much enter the first jhana. And with that, all the unwholesome things must not be there for a time. Even the conceit I am. There is no self in the first jhana. Thoughts are still there. Ease is still there. Pleasure is there. Mindfulness is there. And it's growing stronger. It's growing ever stronger. So everything is much more clearer. You have a very clear knowledge about the background of experience. You are not absorbed, again, which is very important. And then when you draw closer to the second jhana, even the thoughts fade away. And before we enter the first jhana, by the way, in relation to the hindrances, of course, all the grief also fades away, all the suffering, pretty much. Again, this is very important. There is no suffering, and for there not to be no suffering, there cannot be any self. Because when there is self, there is also suffering. So the self must go away, even the conceit I am, which is very important. And then in the second jhana, there are also no thoughts anymore. Previously in the first jhana there ceased the speech, and now there's also no thinking and pondering. And then the states develop further and further until you reach the third jhana, which has even more mindfulness and already developing a lot of equanimity. And the ease that has previously been very prominent fades away, which again is very important. And then in the fourth jhana, you pretty much have equal amounts of mindfulness and equanimity. It is not that the mindfulness grew weaker or anything like that. I just had no means of expressing that properly. It is just that there is only neutral feelings, pretty much. And those, again, can be very enjoyable for a mind that is developed in that regard. But only for a mind that is developed in that regard. For other people, it can even feel very bad. Because not feeling anything at all is usually what people lament when they are, for example, depressed. I don't feel anything anymore. The world is gray and whatever. But for a mind that is developed in jhana, for a mind that is well tamed, it's a neutral feeling where you are no longer pressured to do anything. That is the most sublime of all states. And as you can see, there is always mindfulness present in all of the jhanas, and it's only getting stronger, and equanimity is only getting more. So it's getting more neutral. It's not getting more ecstatic or anything like that. But again, it can only be enjoyed by a developed mind. And now a bit more on practical jhana meditation, because all those states that have been described, even though through the use of similes, can be kind of abstract. And people nowadays usually need more immediate instructions, let's put it like that. So yeah, what is jhana practically like? Practically or pragmatically speaking, samadhi and jhana are states of non-activity. This is where the doing part of your experience starts fading. And it means keeping things together through non-forgetting of the 3 marks. The avijja part of our experience, the ignorance part of our experience, ignorance of the 3 marks, fades. And when that ignorance of the 3 mark fades, your experience becomes more or less together. It keeps things together. And you can't really be, non-active without an insight into the 3 marks. Non-activity cannot be something that you do It can only be discerned through wisdom. And again, jhana does not happen to you. Jhana happens to you. You don't do it. Jhana can never be the result of doing, of following some thing some set of instructions. This is very important. It is a result of discernment. You discern, all those things that I previously assumed to be doing are still happening, but I no longer feel like doing them. This could be a good way of phrasing it. And there can be no cookbook style approach that you can just work off to enter the jhana. This can only suppress craving, as an example. And the Buddha's instructions overall, when it comes to entering the jhanas, have always been pretty brief. And this is because there is no more to it. This can seem very abstract or imprecise because of missing insight. Otherwise, when you have the right view, as an example, it is crystal clear what that state must be. And you should really make it non-abstract. This should be the goal. And non-doing has to be discerned or discovered and not done. You cannot do non-doing. This would be a doing, which almost sounds like a catch-22 or something. But that's how it is. And it is a state of insight that cannot be manufactured. It can only really happen through discernment. And for any jhana to arise, seek out a quiet and undisturbed place. Without company. Company makes it nearly impossible, if not impossible, for people to enter the jhana, at least when you are a beginner. Social interaction really is a thorn, because social interaction makes us react. We are social animals, and we are pretty much biologically programmed to react when there are other people around us. And we always subconsciously worry about them. And they always have an assumption of external pretty much attached to them. And then you should also be mentally secluded from sensuality and unwholesome states, which again includes all the wrong assumptions about self, external, and all the other things. And there is no further secret. There is just long-term consistency. And if you do it long enough and discern rightly and understand rightly, there will be jhana arising. And the pleasure and the ease and all those things arise before jhana due to the seclusion from the unwholesome. And I cannot give you a number of days that it takes for people to enter those states. It can take half a day, it can take 20 minutes if you are very fortunate. For some people, they can just snap into jhana and there's no problem for them. And then there are other people who need a few weeks of seclusion to get there. But overall, you get better the longer you do it. And not everything extraordinary is a jhana. I can only emphasize that over and over again. There are at least 6 kinds of nice feelings or emotions or perceptions or whatever you want to call it before you even enter the first jhana. And to a beginner, all of those are the best things that they have ever experienced, so that must be jhana. But it is not. It is just a very nice feeling that can be there without it being a jhana. And those very nice feelings are perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But you should simply not mistake them for the jhana that the Buddha was talking about. Again, very important. And now to a short tutorial, which is very direct. So if you want to get there, sit quite secluded, socially secluded from sensuality and all unwholesome states. Be restrained, have done the gradual training beforehand, take care of all the bodily needs, and then, strong pain makes you pretty much fall away from concentration. This was often something that the sutta said. And then you just sit there and endure everything that comes up until no feeling can touch you anymore. And then you initially let things go or make an effort to discern the 3 marks pretty much. Over time it gets easier, then you can just let things be as they are. And if you are really skilled, let's put it like that, then whatever arises has no longer any pull or push on your mind, which is very equanimous and very free. And that state really is free from hindrances. And you can have joy of recollecting that you previously suffered through those states that no longer can touch you now. And technically, and this is very important, those states are not limited to the meditation cushion. You can do, or your body can do pretty much everything it wishes, as long as it is not unwholesome. And you can still be in the jhana and experience that kind of relief. As the Buddha said, you can also have it while walking. It is a bit more harder to attain it there, but it is also more durable, as it is more harder, and you need more skill, let's put it like that, to maintain that state. But you should not distract yourself from any kind of feeling. So as soon as there is no feeling that touches you anymore, then you are pretty much in jhana. No good feeling, no bad feeling, no neutral feeling touches you, then you can experience the relief of the jhanas. And jhana should arise based on that, given that you fulfilled all the preconditions. It is a gradual training that requires you doing things in the right order. And when you have not restrained yourself yet, have not endured, have not have the right insights and all those things, then jhanas are simply not possible for you. You should do the prior gradual training. Then the jhanas can arise. But again, you have to fulfill all the prior preconditions and not just some. So yeah, this is very important. And then, based on that, you pretty much experience freedom from the hindrances, which the Buddha described as amongst these the 5 hindrances, respectively as a debt, as a disease, as a prison house, as slavery, or a road across a dangerous desert. But when the 5 hindrances have been abandoned in him, he sees that as freedom from debt, healthiness, release from prison, freedom from slavery, and a land of safety. This is a feeling that you can then experience when you enter pretty much the first jhana, when the hindrances are gone, which is very important. And to test, even though there should be no test necessary, but still, given that people have many kinds of wrong views about jhanas nowadays, I want to give you some marks and features that you can use to diagnose if you are in the first jhana. So first of all, verbal thinking and pondering must be there. They must not only be there, they must be a prominent feature that is very much there, pretty much in the foreground, still going on its own, but still, they are there. And byproduct sensations of pleasure and relief must arise before. And they are not the mark and feature of you entering the first jhana. Pleasure is not the metric. You should not use pleasure to diagnose your jhana. And then there should also be strong mindfulness and awareness. There should be pretty much no self there, and no speech. Verbal thoughts, however, are still present. And there are no unwholesome, very gross or wrong assumptions about external ownership or control. There is no I in the first jhana. Not even the conceit I am is there for a time, for the time you are in the first jhana. It can come back later. Yeah, and everything, practically speaking, feels distant and muffled, like the world of the senses is far away from you. And neither good, nor bad, nor neutral feelings can touch you. They exert no influence over you. And most importantly, and this is very important, you observe pretty much your activities of body, speech, and mind instead of doing them. It must be crystal clear in the jhana. It is peak samadhi. And in that state, there is no doing. There is just happening. And if that is the case, if all those prior conditions are met, then it might very well be that you are in the first jhana. But again, at that point, it doesn't really matter if you are in the first jhana or not, because you are so withdrawn from the world that you are no longer interested in any kind of attainment, and all the, let's call it, spiritual materialism is no longer bothering you. Let's put it like that. And as a rule of thumb, you can only pretty much enter jhana if you don't really want it, because the wanting must cease. And if you have managed to enter the jhana, then you should make sure that you remember what those preconditions to enter the jhana are. You should really make sure how you have gotten there, because those states can vanish. In the beginning, when you are just developing insights, then the knowledge of all those things can be very muddled and not very clear to you, and you should make an effort to clarify all of that. So it can be difficult to reproduce jhana. And especially shortly after stream entry, there are events or there are states of mind that pretty much happen on their own that are oftentimes a bit beyond what you usually would experience given that stage of progress. And those skills, like people experience even higher jhanas, usually vanishes. And you should recollect often and very precisely what the conditions are to enter any kind of jhana. So you can really get established in that state of mind. So you can enter it at will pretty much. And a jhana that is not understood is not a real jhana. And this is something that I really want to emphasize now. So everyone who thinks still that their old pleasure jhanas are the jhanas should make sure that it is all about understanding in Buddhism. It is not about having an experience. It is about understanding your experience. Without understanding your experience, it cannot be a real jhana. So when you have no discernment, no understanding developed in regard to that experience, then it is not what the Buddha called jhana. You want to really make that entire state second nature, and maybe you want to even use a diary and write down the important factors, the things that are important for you. And you should frequently compare what worked for you. And again, jhana is a result, and you should establish the conditions for it to arise. And overall samadhi must be polished like a conch shell, as the Buddha put it. It culminates in the first jhana, but it is already very good before, and you already do not feel very much like doing if you are experiencing samadhi. And it requires a lot of training and a lot of repetition. It is something that must be drilled and trained, like the Buddha put it. It requires striving and effort and all those things. This should be kept in mind. But anyway, let us continue with the immaterial jhanas, because they are also, technically speaking, part of the jhanas that the Buddha frequently talked about. Those were popular during his days, and many people were practicing them. Many people, however, regard them as a variation of the four jhanas, and the Buddha also sometimes named them, or quite often even. And again, they are mere variations of the fourth jhana. And he, the Buddha, has been practicing those jhanas, the seventh and the eighth, up to the seventh and the eighth, with his prior teachers, with I forgot their names. I simply cannot remember them. But he has been practicing them before. And your context must broaden even further. And those jhanas are sometimes called the fifth to the eighth jhana, and sometimes they are called the infinity of space, the base of infinity of consciousness, the base of nothingness, and the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And again, they are extra, and sometimes called pleasant abidings by the Buddha. But again, they are analyzed in a lot of detail in Majjhima Nikaya number 111. And I will give you now, in the next few minutes, a few details on those jhanas. But you should keep in mind that those states are usually not of much interest nowadays. You can have them very much, and they are beneficial when you can enter them. But it's not necessary by any means, which is very important to keep in mind. So what is the fifth jhana? I will give you a short citation. It is the jhana of the infinity of space, or the base of infinity of space, with the complete surmounting of perception of form, with the passing away of perception of sensory impingement, with non-attention to perception of diversity. Space is infinite. A monk enters and dwells in the base of infinity of space. And the body pretty much vanishes. So everything that is material, that is form related, is not there anymore. It is not part of what you perceive right now. And all that remains is pretty much a point of view and boundlessness. It's usually a very scary experience, unless you are well progressed, because then it's freedom from something oppressive. But when your mind is not very well trained, then it's loss of something, loss of stability, and loss of things that you deem very important to you. And the perception of the base of infinity of space and the unification of mind, the contact, the feeling, the perception, volition, the mind, the zeal, the decision, the energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention are all part of it, as displayed in the Majjhima Nikaya number 111. Those are all factors of the fifth jhana. So when people talk about things not being there and pretty much nothing being there, and there being no mindfulness and complete absorption, then that is not true. At least not according to the suttas. And again, in this lecture, we want to discuss what the suttas, what the Buddha very likely had to say about those states, and not necessarily what modern interpretations of the suttas have to say about those states. Because again, pretty much every different teacher has a different interpretation when it comes to those jhanas. And this is very important to keep in mind. And then we have the sixth jhana, which is the base of infinity of consciousness. And again, the citation goes as follows: by completely surmounting the base of infinity of space, consciousness is infinite. A monk enters and dwells in the base of infinity of consciousness. And it is void of infinity of space. It is no longer there. So there's just the consciousness that is boundless. And the constituting factors are the perception of the base of infinity of consciousness and the unification of mind, the contact, feeling, perception, volition, the mind, the zeal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. All those things are part of it, according to Sariputta, who has understood those states in absolute detail, as he was pretty much second only to the Buddha when it comes to his wisdom and his discernment, which is again very important to keep in mind. And again, personally, I cannot attend those states. I will say that, so I'm just reciting pretty much the suttas here. But it is, in my opinion, important to at least clear up those misconceptions and wrong views that are circulating around, and at least give you some citations from the suttas that should make crystal clear that those states are not of any absorbed kind. Again, very important to keep in mind. And then we have the seventh jhana, which is the base of nothingness. By completely surmounting the base of infinity of consciousness, there is nothing. A monk enters and dwells in the base of nothingness, and it is void of the infinity of consciousness. But still, there are things going on that you can discern, because even nothingness is something that can be perceived. Let's put it like that. And there is a perception of the base of nothingness and the unification of mind, the contact, feeling, perception, volition, and mind, the zeal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. All those things are still there. It is not that there is nothing, really. All those things are there. It is just that those things are rather restricted. There is still feeling. There is all those things. There is mindfulness. There is attention. All those things are there. It is not an absorbed state of mind. And then we have the last one, which is the eighth jhana, or the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And it goes as follows. By completely surmounting the base of nothingness, a monk enters and dwells in the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And the Buddha called it the best object of clinging, as an example, in Majjhima Nikaya number 106. So you can still cling to that, because jhanas can be developed as a practitioner, as an unenlightened person, as someone who has not attained stream entry, but then they will not lead you to liberation. This is always very important and always something that I like to emphasize. Certain states are possible to attain, but without the understanding, they will not help you. Well, they are still helpful and beneficial in leading to good future results, but they are leading to future results. The Buddha called it taints still, even if they were leading to heaven. So there is a distinction between things that are bad, or strictly speaking unwholesome, as in not leading to liberation. There are still taints that lead you to heaven, and taints that lead you to hell. And you should by all means rather strive for those that lead you to heaven. And concerning this jhana, there cannot be much said about it, because perception is kind of not really there anymore. And concerning that, Sariputta just emerged mindful from that attainment. Having done so, he contemplated the past states, which had ceased and changed thus. So indeed, these states, not having been, come into being, having been, they vanished. No real perception is pretty much there, and hence you cannot describe that state in terms of characteristics, like with the ones before. Because this time around, it is the very process of perception that changes. It's neither perception nor non-perception. Okay, and then we have just one last thing, which is sometimes labeled the ninth jhana, which is the Nirodha Samapatti, and it is the cessation of perception and feeling. And this is also very important and something that is often overlooked. Consciousness, technically speaking, is still there. It is a cessation of perception and feeling, not the cessation of consciousness. And the sutras go as follows: by completely surmounting the base of neither perception or non-perception, a monk enters and dwells in the cessation of perception and feeling, and having seen with wisdom, his taints are utterly destroyed. And it is one of the most frequently named paths to arahantship, namely going through all those jhanas and thus being a body witness, as the Buddha called them. And the Buddha called it the only true peace before parinibbana, and supposedly those states are reserved to anagamis and arahants. But again, if you do them wrongly, if you do a wrong Nirodha, that does not mean that you are an anagami or an arahant. There are states that imitate those states. Those states of completely blacking out and not being there. Those are very likely not what Nirodha Samapatti is. And the sutras continue as follows. Regarding those states, Sariputta abided unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, free, disassociated, with a mind rid of barriers. He understood there is no escape beyond. And thus he was liberated. And thus he attained arahantship. And again, it's very important to keep that in mind, because Sariputta was in a lofty state of mind, in a detached state of mind, in a free state of mind, disassociated, unrepelled, independent. He was no longer assuming any kind of self, any kind of external, and thus his mind was liberated. So this is very important. But again, those states are not of much interest to most practitioners. I have to highlight that again and again, because even the first jhana is very difficult to attain and serves already as a foundation for insight, for final knowledge, for nibbana. And yeah, at the state when you are already an arahant, then you very likely don't have too much interest in those states. Let's put it like that. And now we have one more slide on the supernatural powers, because I had no idea where to put it otherwise. And I still wanted to say something about those things. Because in the sutras there are accounts of those things. And it is said that the Fourth Jhana, for example, is the basis for many of those supernatural powers, which again is not exactly true. I would say it is the basis for some of those. Because as an example, Devadatta attained the supernatural powers, or a certain subset of supernatural powers, before he even became a Sotapanna. And mainly they are independent of Dhamma, or vision of how things really are. And some of those are, having been one becomes many. So you essentially have more than one. Let's say you can do many things at once. Let's put it like that. He appears and he vanishes, so he can pretty much teleport. He goes unimpeded through walls, ramparts, and mountains, so he can dive through earth and water, through earth, as if it was water. This is how it is often phrased. And he can also walk on water without thinking in, as if it were dry land. And as you can see, those things can be very much compared with lucid dreaming, as an example. In lucid dreaming, you can do all those things. I do not say that lucid dreaming and this is pretty much the same thing, but it should give you an intuition. And sitting cross-legged, he flies through the air like a bird, and he can touch and stroke even the sun and the moon, which are so mighty. And he can exert influence with his body as far as the Brahma world. So I'm not sure how you want to call it, but this is pretty much what people would regard as astral projection or something like that. So those states can be pretty much attained by anyone with a developed samadhi. The Buddha was very open about the fact that anyone who has very well developed samadhi can realize any state he wishes for. But that does not mean he will realize any state. He will just realize those states that he desires, or that he works for. He has the potential to realize any of those states, as I understand it, but that does not mean that every monk or every practitioner will have access to all those things. Many people are simply not interested in any supernatural powers. And this would pretty much include myself. I'm not sure why, but they have no spell on me. I'm simply not really interested in any of those things. And the Buddha called them ordinary attainments, except for the true knowledges, for example, of karma and the knowledge of past lives, the knowledge of how beings pass away and reappear according to their actions. And sometimes there are also accounts where the divine ear or the divine eye and emotion reading and shape-shifting, as an example, are named. For example, the Devadatta convinced a prince via shape-shifting that he had great supernatural powers. And there's also accounts where the Buddha says that a person can embrace the mind of another with his own mind to read his emotions, to read his mind. Some person can never really read his Vedana, what he deems good and bad, but other people with well-developed minds can surely read the emotions of other people. And this is something that becomes very obvious for an advanced practitioner. At least for me, it is relatively easy to read the emotions of other people. And this is simply a matter of mental resource distribution. When you are no longer absorbed in your objects of desires so much, then you can just see the marks and features of certain emotions in other people, because they are not hiding them very well. Let's put it like that. Everything on their bodies is pretty much screaming what emotions they are having. Yeah, but again, the divine ear and the divine eye is pretty much hearing sounds from the Brahma world, which is very far away, as an example. So this is pretty much an overview over all the supernatural powers, in case you are interested in those things. Personally, I am not very much interested in them, but yeah, everyone has his own inclination, let's put it like that. And when people are interested in that, then let's put it like that, then they are very much then they can very much benefit from those states. But again, let us now come to the summary and the key points of chapter 7. And first of all, there are many wrong jhanas in existence in contemporary Buddhism. This is just a plain fact. There are hundreds, if not, well, I'm not sure if there are hundreds, but every teacher will have his own jhana, and every of those jhanas cannot be what the Buddha taught as jhanas, because they are not all the same. and not all of them can be right at the same time. And most people will just pick the jhana that suits them the most, which is also very important. The jhana that you can practice the easiest, the jhanas that come easiest to you, are very likely those that you will deem the real jhanas, simply because you do them and you have some attachment to them, which is not a very nice way of putting it, but it's probably a very true way of putting it. And to experience the Buddha jhanas, you have to be free from the hindrances. And that is not a mere absence of the hindrances, which is also very important. And the four jhanas are the basis of awakening, are the basis for liberation. And you need at least the first jhana for full liberation. And there are 4 additional variations of the fourth jhana, called the Arupa Jhanas, namely the immaterial jhanas, jhanas 5 to 8, and sometimes also including Nirodha Samapatti, namely the cessation of perception and feeling. And the Anagami and the Arahant can sometimes also enter a state called cessation of perception and feeling, which still has consciousness, as I understand it. But yeah, this is pretty much all there is to say about the jhanas. It is very important to keep in mind that they are a state of insight, and simply by dwelling in that state of insight, you will come closer to a full liberation of mind. You decondition your habit of avidya, your habit of sensuality, and thus you get closer and closer to full liberation. And it's not mere calm or good feelings or anything like that. It is a state of insight, which is very important to keep in mind. Okay, and now we have a meditation of the day, namely a meditation on non-activity, where I try to exemplify how all of this works. So if you wish to practice this kind of jhana, then you can go and have a look and maybe practice along. But yeah, apart from that, we still have some questions and answers that you can ask down below. And if there is anything unclear, and I would not be surprised if you have some criticism of what I have presented here, because many people are very attached to their views when it comes to jhana and very much try to defend their views on jhana. And when someone comes along and challenges those views, then that's not a very nice thing. And in the beginning, I was also like that, which is also very important to keep in mind. Many people who practice the Buddha jhanas now have also practiced all the other jhanas in the past. It is not that I never did that. Most people I know who are now practicing Buddha jhanas have been doing all the other things in the past, and then found out, okay, that is really not it. And then they focus on something else, and then they started focusing on the real Buddha jhanas, which are states of insight. So by all means, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them down below in a new comment so that YouTube notifies me. Otherwise, your question might go unnoticed, as I cannot go through all the videos that I have recorded. It's close to 500 now, so it gets a bit crowded. So anyway, this is pretty much it for today. Now to the contact slide. If you want to support me on Patreon, support my work, feel free to scan the top QR code. If you want to join the Dhamma Hub Discord server, feel free to scan the second one. And if you want to look through books that I've written, feel free to scan the last QR code. Anyway, if you know anyone who might benefit from such a lecture or who might be interested in such a lecture, feel free to share it with them so that some good or early Buddhist Dhamma might be of benefit to them. But yeah, apart from that, I think I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye, and maybe see you next week.